All right, we're working on graph paper today, doing bar graphs. Okay, so we're going to be not only reading bar graphs, but creating our own bar graphs. So we are working on graph paper today because we can use the grid lines to help us draw straight lines, right?
Right.
So that way it's not looking really bad and, just lines all over your paper. Hopefully it helps us draw straighter lines. All right, so in example 1, we're using this chart to make a bar graph. We have to decide a couple things before we start our bar graph. The first thing that we need to decide is what is going to be our scale. All right, we need to choose a scale. And by scale, I mean on the left-hand column, I need to go from 0 to something. All right, now I choose my scale based on the range of the numbers in my table. So what's my smallest number in my table? What's the smallest number? 13. What's the biggest number? 18. So that's a pretty small range. All right, so I could start at 10, right? Do I need any numbers less than 10? No. And then I could go up to 20. I could increase by 1s or I could increase by 2s. I wouldn't do any bigger than that. I would go by 1s or 2s. All right, now you always start at 0, but your second number can jump to whatever number you want. What if all of your values were in the 500s? You're going to go 0, 100, 200, 300. You don't need any of those numbers. So that second number, and you'll see that in just a second, that second number you can jump to whatever you want. And then it needs to be equal intervals after that. All right, so jump to here, we can jump to 10. So let's come over to our graph, and I want you to start labeling your graph. Okay? We're going to set up our graph. I want you to notice a couple of things, and this will help you on your homework tonight. One thing, notice that just like I just said, I went from 0 to 10 on my first interval jump. But that doesn't mean that I have to increase by 10s for the rest of my bar graph intervals. Okay? I can jump to whatever baseline number I need to start at. So if your numbers are in the 500s, you go from 0 to 500. Here, I go from 0 to 10, and then each one of my intervals after that, 10 to 12, 12 to 14. Notice that I'm increasing all of the rest of my intervals by how many?
2.
By 2, okay? So for the rest of my intervals, they do need to be the same. And notice also that they are the same distance apart space-wise. You want to try to space them the same as well. All right, and then the last thing for setting up our bar graph is going to be our grid lines. Doing our grid lines. And this, again, just helps us make sure that our columns are accurate. All right, so let's finish setting it up. Okay, so my vertical row, my vertical column will always be my quantity. My horizontal column will always be my category. Does that make sense? Quantities in the vertical column, categories in the horizontal column. It'll always be labeled that way. All right, so now this is the easy and fun part. You can use colored pencils if you want. You can make it pretty. How many missions did the Atlantis go on? 16. Very good. So I go up to 16 and I do my column. How many missions did the Columbia go on? 18. So I go up to 18 and do my column. How many missions did the Discovery go on? 17. So I go about halfway. And then what about the Endeavor? 13. And then I shade it in. And that's my bar graph. And then you just label your vertical column whatever your quantities are. Here it was number of missions. we're doing your turn now. Number 1, I want you to go ahead and set up your bar graph however you think. So you're going to have to choose your interval and your scale, and then your categories, your columns. I want you to go ahead and set up the graph. So we're going to go Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. That's our horizontal columns. We start at 0. Like I said, we always start our bar graph at 0, but then we jump up to 50. Okay? Now, for me, when I went by 10s, I didn't have enough room, so I could go by 20s. That would be a little bit easier. Either one is fine. If you go by 10s, your bar graph is really big, but it's not going to be wrong, okay? So it just depends. Now, you don't want to go by 50s. 50s would be too big because there would be too much space in between for guessing. All right, now that we have them set up, we just need our grid lines. And now we're ready to draw our columns. All right, so your bar graph should look something like this. All right, again, doesn't have to be exact, okay, just something. Obviously mine isn't perfect, mine isn't, you know, without error or flaw. All right, well, there's no mistakes, but it's just the lines aren't perfect. So anyway, so that's how your bar graph should look. Does it look about like that? Yeah, do your columns match your intervals? You have the right numbers? Okay, now the last thing that we're going to learn today is the double bar graph. The double bar graph, okay? So we set it up essentially the same way. I want you to look with me on example 2 on the top of page 109. The first thing we need to do is set our scale or our intervals. All right, now what is the smallest number here? Smallest number is 11, biggest number is 26. So I go by 1s. Well, that's not going to be fun. I go by 2s. That's not going to be fun either. Just go by 5s. 10s might be a little too big because you would only have 3 intervals, 0, 10, 20, 30, or 4 intervals, okay? So go by 5s. That would be a good interval to choose. 0, 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, and then 30. And then we can close off our graph. Now, what's going to be our categories? What are our categories here? And we can abbreviate on our graph. Zach, what's going to be our categories? Yeah, very good. The sports. Soccer, basketball, track and field, and volleyball. But now I have 2 different subcategories within that category, right? I have a boys and girls teams for each sport. So now with a double bar graph, you need to do a key. All right, so you are going to have to use some type of different color, whether it's a red pen or a blue pen, I don't care, or pencil, highlighter, but you need to set a color code. See what I'm doing in the top right-hand corner? Blue for boys and pink for girls. That's pretty straightforward. And now I'm going to set my categories: soccer, basketball, track and field, and volleyball. But now I need 2 columns for each category. I need to graph how many boys played soccer and how many girls played soccer, how many boys played basketball, how many girls played basketball. And the way that I do that is, of course, I need my horizontal grid lines. So let's go ahead and do that. Okay, so now I'm ready to draw my columns. How many boys played soccer? How many boys played soccer, guys? 26. So I go up just above the 25. And then how many girls played soccer? 20, right? So now this is where it's important. Shade it in according to the color. Blue for boys, pink for girls. All right? Now, notice that in my double bar graph, my columns are touching. In your double bar graph, within the subcategories, your columns must touch. All right? Then you need space between categories. So there's some space between soccer and basketball. And then I need to just fill it in girls and boys. More girls played basketball in this school than boys. Alright, now I want you to fill in the rest of the graph. I want you to finish the rest of this graph. Okay, and this is what your double graph should look like when you're done. And if you understand that, that's everything you need to know for bar graphs.